One of my brother and I's favorite pastimes is sitting down to watch a movie, spending 20 minutes indecisively flipping through other movies just in case something piques our interest, before finally going back to the first film we intended on watching anyways. However, on rare occasions, through all that flipping through streaming services, we find a diamond in the rough. This is about one of those. As I recall, it was late at night, and there was a road trip we intended to sleep through the next day, so we were committed to finding something to keep us up. We found that and more. A film that's probably in my top 10 to 20 movies ever, Dutch director Martin Koolhoven's 2016 revisionist western, Brimstone. I feel inclined to make this video less as a substantive review and work of film analysis, and more just a gush of how good it is. Because literally nobody other than me, at least that I can find in the English-speaking world, seems to care about this film. Evidently, the movie was critically well received in Europe. From what I understand, it won big at the Dutch version of the Oscars, but absolutely bombed with a box office of 2 million against a budget of 12. Sadly, that was probably inevitable, as this is both not a movie for everyone due to the dark and graphic content, but also because of the weird marketing. The two central characters of the film are played by Guy Pearce and Dakota Fanning, but Kit Harington, who is in maybe 20 minutes of the film, was all over the posters and marketing, due of course to the then success of a little show called Game of Thrones. If you see Jon Snow dressed as a cowboy and put it on anticipating that, you're about to be absolutely blindsided by a dark revenge thriller exploring themes of abuse, religion, and generational trauma. Discussion of the plot and themes come with a massive content warning. Many people subscribed to this channel are here because of my David Lynch video, so they're no stranger to these themes. But unless you're ready to be very uncomfortable, do not watch this movie. Sometimes, in my opinion, cinema needs to be jarring and uncomfortable to get its point across, i.e. The Shining or Fire Walk with Me. And thus, it can be great filmmaking without being a necessarily fun watch. Spoiler warning obviously as well, but to sum up the story very shortly, Brimstone is a non-linear narrative, separated into chapters, following the life of Dakota Fanning's character Liz, aka Joanna, who is pursued throughout her life by an evil reverend without a name, a specter of her dark past, who is later revealed to be her sexually abusive father in the penultimate segment of the film. Liz grows up in a religious community of Dutch immigrants in the American West, experiences a highly traumatic series of events in short succession, escapes, becomes a prostitute for years, before finally finding a fulfilling family life as the wife of a farmer and midwife for her town. Eventually, the Reverend tracks her down, and while he destroys much of what she had built, she finally manages to slay him and save her daughter from the same abuse she was subjected to, before sacrificing herself to set up her daughter's future years later. I found quite a few reviews of the film that write it off as little more than a trauma exploitation film, but I vehemently disagree. While many horrible things happen to Liz and others around her in the film, the themes of the movie are ultimately about confronting one's past and reclaiming power on your own terms. It doesn't shy away from the violent realities of being a woman in the time period depicted, or quite frankly, in almost any time or place, but nor does it show them as something one should just give up and accept. I think this is best seen in a closing narration by the adult version of Liz's daughter Sam, who says that her memory of her mother is that of a fearless fighter, someone who never gave up, and had a peerless inner strength. It's an incredibly powerful idea, as all the bad things that happen to her metaphorically die with the Reverend. With her past overcome, all the darkness fades, and her memory, despite the fact that she does die, is defined by everything good about her instead of the way she had been hurt. In short, she is not her trauma. She is remembered for her strength, and the Reverend remembered only for being an evil bastard who got shot out of a window, completely robbed of his desired salvation. It tells us that it's not about how we start, it's about how we finish, and that abuse is not something that taints you morally or makes you undeserving of love. I found it to be quite uplifting, at least at the very end, despite a very bleak nature to the movie for most of it. And Dakota Fanning's performance is something much deserved of praise. She does a tremendous job portraying a character who literally does not have a tongue for much of the film, relying on her face alone and sign language in order to portray Liz. The aforementioned audience response is really interesting to me, as the director noted in an interview with Psychotronic Cinema, which I'll link below, that opinions were quite polarized among national lines, with many reviewers from Europe seeing it as a feminist movie, and many Americans seeing it as misogynistic. Speaking on this difference, Koolhoven writes, "When they, Americans, see a woman beaten up in a movie, they are faster to think that the movie tells you that's an okay thing, forgetting the actual emotion they got when they saw it. They feel much more comfortable watching violence that is cool to watch. I think they see movies purely as entertainment, which is fine in itself, but some go as far to think that a movie should never be disturbing or give you negative emotions, I guess. I always knew it would be controversial. The movie deals with religiously motivated sex and violence, which is a dangerous cocktail. But I did not expect the European consensus would be that different from the US. While many Americans call the movie misogynistic in Europe, it is mostly seen as feminist, which makes much more sense to me. I find myself agreeing with Koolhoven, and this ultimately comes down to the principle of depiction, not necessarily meaning endorsement, which I think is a dead horse worth beating, as it seems like younger audiences especially, at least from my extremely limited perspective as an out-of-touch person, are getting ironically quite puritanical about dark themes in their media. It's also a larger trend in American culture about being more comfortable with brutal violence unless it's of a sexual nature, and just not wanting to talk about that kind of abuse. There's of course a matter of taste if you think that the content of Brimstone is gratuitous, but I think everything is necessary to create the bleak atmosphere before eventually it is overcome at the end. Koolhoven, coming from a very traditional Dutch Calvinist upbringing, is writing this to confront the religious trauma and abuse he sees in his society, not to endorse abuse. I think that much is clear if you can make it through the admittedly upsetting subject matter. If you are watching this video and have seen the film, please let me know how it plays to you. I can only speculate as how it plays to anyone with different experiences or opinions of myself. I'd like to know, do you think it reads as necessary, or whether the violence and abuse is in fact gratuitous? Another performance that cannot be overlooked is of course the central villain, the Reverend, as played by Guy Pearce. He's one of my favorite movie villains to date, and actually fills me with a sense of profound dread. He's terrifying while on screen, and often even scarier when off it, as you wait for him to strike like a slasher villain. Something really interesting is how he's framed throughout the movie. He almost seems taller than he actually is. It might just be me, but he's standing while others are seated while preaching, and occasionally shot from a lower angle. He's imposing and borderline supernatural in his durability and drive. Incredibly important for the aforementioned themes, however, Pearce is also willing to play him as pathetic in the penultimate chapter, breaking down his terrifying facade and religious justifications for his actions to show a disgusting man who assumes the role of a force of nature to try and rationalize his crimes. When you go from that chapter, and then return for the finale, or rewatch the film, you can get a whole new experience having seen how he ticks, knowing that rather than a punishing force of retribution as he patterns himself, he's been undertaking this quest to try and alleviate his own shame and guilt. Finally, it must be said, it's a very well-made film. I am not a filmmaker, I just watch movies and soyjack at them. So much of the technical stuff is lost on me. That being said, there's a tremendous use of light and shadow throughout the entire film that adds to the atmosphere, and some gorgeous sequences that break up the otherwise stark western backdrop, like the snowfield in the finale. It also has one of my favorite uses of shaky cam ever, the only time in the movie it's used, which is just after Liz has slaughtered a pig and is deeply shaken by the experience. It's very jarring, very good. All I can really say past this is that if you can stomach an intense and dark movie, which, is, assuming a lot, I highly recommend giving Brimstone a try. In my opinion, it's one of the best westerns to come out in the last decade or so, and a film that was quite formative to me in terms of consuming media with darker themes, done well, alongside the works of David Lynch and others I got into around the same time in early to mid high school. Oh god, I'm getting old, aren't I? Watch Brimstone.